In this lesson, we'll take a quick look at animation in Cinema 4D. So this is Lesson 07 Start. It just has a simple sword in the scene. And so we'll use this as our example. We'll concentrate here on the animation area of our interface. And so here we have the power slider, which is basically the beginning of our animation, whatever it's set to the end. And you can see that the current frame is listed here. We have the range for our animation from 0 frames to 90 frames located here, as well as a kind of range slider here, which we can modify, showing us different portions of our timeline. We also have our playback controls, so we can go to the start and the end of our animations. We can go to the previous and next frame, okay, and then we can also play forwards and backwards here. We also have options for auto keyframing, okay, and then the ability to turn off and on the rotation, the movement, and the scaling for recording in our animation. Okay, so to actually start to set some keyframes, we can, let's say, move this sword. So we'll move it up, and let's just kind of rotate this into a position like this, and maybe move it back a bit. And so let's hit Control and click on the power slider. Okay, so that's going to set a keyframe here, and if we take a look at our sword and go into the coordinates, you can see that the little dots next to the position, the scale, and the rotation are all red, indicating that there is a keyframe on that particular frame. Now if we move ahead, you can see that they're now hollow red circles, and so that's telling us that these are in fact keyed, but we're not on a keyframe at the current moment. So if we move back, you can see there's our keyframe. Now we can tell that these are keyed, but we don't have a keyframe right now. Okay, and so let's go ahead and go to frame 10, and we can move it down, and let's go ahead and rotate it. Okay, Control click on the power slider to add a keyframe, and you can see as we click and drag between those keys are added. Now frame 20, we'll go ahead and follow through, and let's kind of move it back up and over. Okay, and let me try that again. Get that moved back over, and then move it just a little bit, and then we'll add a key. Okay, so now if we play that animation through, you can see it plays through. We can now, if we want to set this just to maybe 30, we can go ahead and set that down to 30 frames. We can put that in numerically, and now you can see our keys a little bit better. Okay, so now we've got movement from frame 0 to frame 9 to frame 20. Let's say we want to move one of these keyframes. We can select the key and just drag it to move it. If we want to select all of these keys, we can click and drag across those, and then clicking on this end, we can kind of scale those keys in and out to change the speed of our animation. Okay, and we can click and drag through this. Okay, let's say that we want to animate another attribute of this sword. So let's say we want it to appear suddenly and then disappear. Well, we can animate any attribute that has this little circle next to it. So in this case, we've got the visibility in the editor and visibility in the renderer with a little circle next to it. We can animate those. We can animate these coordinates. If we go into our object, you can see we have a couple of things that we can animate. If we go into here, we have elements that we can animate of these particular pieces. In the instance of creating geometry with generators, you'll have a lot more options for being able to animate elements of that. For instance, when we looked at the sweep NURBS and the loft NURBS, there are elements of that you can animate to create some really interesting effects. So let's say that we want to turn the visibility on as it comes through. So we'll go ahead and go to frame 0. We will go to basic, and all we need to do is Control click on this little dot to add a key there. So right now it's set to default. We want to actually turn it on or off. So we'll turn it off to begin with. Let's go to frame 1, turn it back on, key it again, and now it suddenly appears. And then let's go ahead, set a key at frame 20 by control clicking. At frame 21, we'll turn it off again. So it appears, swings through, and disappears again. Alright, now to actually get in and modify these keys a little bit more, we can go into the timeline. So let's go up here. You can see that under animation we have a number of options here as well, and a lot of these are duplicated from the playback area down here and the power slider. You can see we can go to start, to end, play forwards and backwards, auto key, and so forth. Okay, but to access the timeline itself, we'll go up to Window, go to Timeline, and the hotkey to bring that up is Shift F3. So we'll go ahead and bring this up, and I actually want to view this in F-curve mode. And now when we select the rotation here of our sword, and come down here, and you can see that we have these curves that we're able to modify here. So right now you can see that we have a tangent coming out here. It kind of eases out, and it's very smooth coming down into this keyframe and coming back up. Well, we can modify these by simply breaking the tangents and sharpening those up. If you're not familiar with animation in general, we have a lot of courses that go over the basics of animation, but this is going to be much like the graph editor in Maya, where we're working with our animation curves. And so there's different types of interpolation that you can add to these, different types of spline types that you can add. So if you want something that is very soft with some ease in or ease out, make sure to check out the visual guide on ease in and ease out if you're unfamiliar with those terms. But it's basically just different ways of telling Cinema 4D how to go between the keyframes that we add. We can also come in here and select those keyframes and move them around. Okay, moving them left to right is going to change the time value, and up and down is going to change the value of whatever this is. And in this case, it is the rotation values. We can modify those, and then tweaking the handles will change how that animation comes in. So in this case, it speeds right into that key and then jumps right back out of it. So it tends to speed that up a little bit more. Okay, I don't want to get too in depth here in the timeline, but this is just I wanted to show you how you would go in and manually edit those keyframes that you add in there. And you can see this shows you the position of the keyframes. It doesn't necessarily show you how those keyframes, how the animation comes into those keyframes. Okay, and then we can go back to the beginning. We can scrub through if we want to. Okay, and if you ever want to make a preview of your animation, we can come up here and go to Make Preview. We can choose a full render, or we can just do a hardware preview of all frames. Make that as a QuickTime or AVI, and you can just hit OK. Okay, that'll go ahead and make that, bring it up in the picture viewer, and then you can play that through. So if you've used Maya, think of it like a Play Blast. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of the way to add keyframes. Again, any of the attributes that you have, little dots here, you're able to add keyframes to. Okay, there are materials, you can add keyframes to different elements of your materials, and there's a lot of flexibility in adding those keys. And then you can manipulate the position of those keys here in the power slider, moving those around, scaling and rotating those, scaling the keys, that is. And then you can go into your timeline if you want to get into a little bit more depth in animation. If you're familiar with animation in another package, this should be very familiar to you. You can go into the rotation, scale, and position. In this case, we also have the visibility that has been keyed, and we can modify that as well. All right, so just a quick look at animation here in Cinema 4D, a very basic overview of setting keys and just getting that working. The next thing that we'll look at is an important element of Cinema 4D, and one that you're going to have a lot of fun using if you get in and actually start using Cinema 4D on a regular basis. That is MoGraph. And so we'll take a quick look at some of the elements of MoGraph in the next lesson.